Welcome, everybody, to the April 24th, 2024 meeting of the North Andover Finance Committee. I see that we have a quorum, so I will call this meeting to order at 7:04. If we could stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, that would be great. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Thank you, everybody. We do have some important business on the docket tonight, but before we get into it, I would just like to give a brief little explanation of how we got here. So if you'll bear with me. April 19th, I received a letter from Superintendent Gilligan indicating that he would like to discuss consideration by this committee in transferring the entire $1.5 million Finance Committee reserve account to the school department operating budget to cover unforeseen expenses in the current, my allergies are killing me, so current 2024 year. Also on April 19th, the Finance Committee was copied on a letter from our town manager to the Select Board, and in the letter, it was explained that the school department was currently projecting a $3.2 million deficit after they had already offset $1.5 million on their own. So, and they can certainly correct me if I'm wrong when it comes their turn, but they had a total deficit in the current fiscal year of $4.7 million, but were able to deal with almost a third of it, but needed help with the rest. So in her letter, the town manager laid out a plan to address the remaining $3.2 million and close the school department deficit for this fiscal year. That plan relies on the Finance Committee voting to commit the full balance of our reserve fund to the school department, and it also requires us to suspend our policies and use the entirety of the $750,000 balance of the special education reserve to help close the deficit. So that's why we're here tonight. So additionally, I think we're here tonight to fulfill one of the Finance Committee's biggest responsibilities, and that is to review and consider any matter that may have a long or short-term fiscal impact on the town so that we can make objective recommendations at town meeting. This deficit has a short-term impact for sure on the school side, since it's been made clear to me and that the schools need this money as soon as possible to pay bills. And certainly, again, they can correct me if I'm wrong. If I've drawn the wrong conclusion, then they'll have the chance to correct me. It's created as part of the town manager's plan, a hiring freeze on the town side. If I was listening acutely enough on Monday night, that would prevent the town from hiring a 911 operator or a patrolman. That's a problem in my eyes. Excuse me. It's created a 10% budget reduction across all town departments immediately. If not dealt with, the deficit could have long-lasting impacts. For instance, if this plan doesn't thread the needle we need it to, and we need to borrow money to fill the deficit, it would negatively impact our bond rating, and that would have a significant impact on our ability to execute Facilities Master Plan 2, which town meeting has overwhelmingly supported. So I expect that after the presentation we're going to hear tonight, committee members will have, many questions. I would also like to say that the fact that we're in this position where we need to act quickly because of the size of the deficit and what I assume would be the inability of the school department to meet the current financial obligations it's alarming. It's alarming as a Finance Committee member, as a taxpayer, and as a father of 3 kids who are in the North Andover school system. So after listening to the presentation given to the Select Board on Monday night, it seems it seems to me that a portion of this deficit is unforeseen. But it also seems to me that a portion maybe should have been forecasted and addressed a little bit earlier, or at least some alarm bells should have been raised. So it's frustrating to me that it appears, again, solely from the presentation I heard on Monday night to the Select Board, that the extent of this deficit was discovered only after staff on the town side noticed the deficit in the school salaries was larger than it normally is. So I hope that's addressed in the presentation, but if it isn't, I would expect committee members are going to want to dig into that. These were issues that, I had hoped the superintendent would address himself with us. I will say that originally he was scheduled to meet with us, along with Dr. Mealy, the assistant superintendent, to walk us through the deficit, discuss their request, but things have changed, and tonight we have the chairman of the school committee and the assistant superintendent. I will let them address the change in representation if they see fit. I think the special recognition should be granted to Melissa and Lynn and Kyle on the town side, who quickly and with determination to help the schools address this deficit quickly should be applauded. So, with that said, I think we should move on to the next agenda item, which would be public comment first, and then we can get to the Dr. Mealy and the school committee chairman.
Mr. Chair, your remote member has joined.
Thank you. We do have, Keith, can you hear us? All right. Well, we do have a remote member, Keith Cheney, who has joined. So we will, any votes we take tonight will be roll call votes. And Keith, we are going to be on the listen for you for any questions or comments. So next order of business is public comment. Do we have anybody for public comment? Seeing none, I think it would be the appropriate time to dig in. So welcome to our school committee chair, Dave Brown, and Assistant Superintendent Jim Mealy. And I will let you take it from here, Jim, if you want to project your stuff.
No, I think we can go straight to Dr. Mealy's presentation.
Okay.
Okay, I know a few of you were at the meeting on Monday night and saw this presentation. It's very similar to the letter that went out from the town manager. Just kind of expands on that. Thank you very much for having us here on such short notice and dealing with this issue. So getting right into it, we had identified expenses, and one of the things that I keep hearing is that alarm bells weren't rung early. They were, not necessarily to the degree with which they needed to be, but we've been talking about the out-of-district tuition being well over budget since the end of last year, and the state indicating that they were going to try to help mitigate communities, because it wasn't just us. It was everybody in the state when the OSD approved a 14% increase for tuition. And we've been talking about that, and then the court cases that happened during the course of the year where they finally determined that we're liable for that student, whether they lived in the town for a month or a few years, but we own them as an out-of-district placement. So those things happened during the year. But myself and Dr. Gilligan were having conversations with the town manager during the year, indicating that we have a significant deficit. I don't know the extent of it yet. It keeps getting worse. And she was saying that she thought she might have a significant deficit, worried about what the winter could be, but I didn't elaborate, and in her defense, her definition of significant was much different than mine. So that was a lack of communication on my part. In the in-district special education transportation as a whole is almost $1 million over for the various reasons: additional buses and monitors needed for additional students, increases, homeless transportation. I put in parentheses that some students cost us $500 a day, and we're double the homeless students this year that we were last year. Out of district tuition, a big part of that's OSD, and the other part of that are those students that I think those of you who were on the committee last year remember that we had to come at the end of the year for a settlement that we had been told we have to pay, but there's practically no way you're going to lose that case. And we did. We lost. And actually, there's a case study that they were using in training of cases that shouldn't have been lost and were. So we not only didn't get that money back that we thought we were going to get back, we're on the hook going forward for years to go now for that amount and whatever increases they have. So out-of-district tuition is much higher than we anticipated, and we didn't get any help from the state. There is what they're calling emergency relief from circuit breaker that we have been determined to be eligible for, but they haven't yet determined how much money they have to fund that and how much that would be for us. Supposedly we'll hear in a week or so what that number is. Circuit breaker reimbursement, we like the, when we're doing the town budget and we level fund for Chapter 70, we level fund for circuit breaker reimbursement, but that was $257,000 less than it was the previous year. And then, as you may recall, at the end of last year, we used what we thought we were going to have left over for ESSER funds of $200,000, but we had to use it to close out FY23. And then repairs and maintenance, again, you know, we talked about this last year, it continued again this year. If you ever drive by the middle school, it's very difficult to drive by and not see a Canestrano HVAC van parked out in front. You know, we have a ton of work being done throughout the district. So expenses total 2.8, and then the salaries. And one thing I want to address is it's not true that we didn't know about this or that there was a salary deficit, and the only time we heard about it was when Lynn found it. I had been talking to, and Lynn knows this, our account supervisor, who's very good, and normally we do run a deficit in our salaries, and those are what are covered at the end of the year with the offsets. And she said it's getting higher every week, and it's higher than it normally would be. At that point last year, we looked and it was $1.2 million in the negative, and it was $3 million. We haven't done any of the offsets yet, and that's where we apply them. And I'm like, that can't be right. It can't be right. And that's when Lynn called, she was kind of confirming what we were seeing, and I agreed with her that, yeah, I don't know what it is, and we're looking to figure out what's causing this. I honestly thought it had something to do with the fact that this is a year where we have 27 payrolls, and that something was going wrong with the calculations on the 27th payroll. Lynn, you know, did her work, we did our work, and we got together again and said, no, this is accurate. The encumbrances that are left are paying people the amount that they're supposed to be paid, so it's correct. And those are the items that you see up there that account for the portion of the salary deficit that we wouldn't be making up with our offsets. We've had a large increase in subs and long-term subs. We have, this one here has come up a lot too. When we put the budget together, I was making the assumption, which you do in budgets, that we were going to be returning to the level pre-COVID of teaching assistants that we need across the district. It did not work out at all. We weren't able to reduce positions, and part of that was that we started the year with 69 new students on IEPs requiring those services. So it didn't happen, and I take responsibility for that. The extra hours are staff hours associated with maybe starting the day, getting kids off the bus, or you know, the special education kids who need assistance, or and things like that within our schools. Column increases, we did address this in contract negotiations, but what in other districts are seeing this as well, especially Idaho State. It's very easy to get credits online through programs like Idaho State, and it's become very easy for teachers to move up columns by accumulating a certain number of credits. So we got contract language that limits to one course from Idaho State or similar programs in the course of the year. And then the other thing I hear is that, well, the teacher contract just blew things out of the water, and it didn't at all. We had budgeted for a 2.5% increase, as we normally do, and it was an additional 0.5% increase, which the town manager had already set aside money of $220,000 to cover that. And then the last one, teachers covering extra classes. Instead of having to hire out, some teachers were willing to give up a prep and teach. So this actually would cost us less than it would have been to be going out and getting somebody to cover those classes. And here are the offsets we've been talking about. These are annual offsets that we usually have, other than the first one. The salary reserve had been set aside by the town manager. But we do food services indirect costs where they are in our schools using space, using utilities, custodians covering, so we get to charge a percentage back to food services of those, and community programs, saying they have their programs in the schools, and we're able to charge back those costs to them. Similarly, food service and unit attendance. The food service department covers the time that they are there covering lunch. They don't pay for the time covering recess, but they do for lunch. And then we have our, like the preschool is a tuition-funded revolving account that goes in there, and we pay some salaries and some utilities and other things out of that revolving account. We do that at the end of the year once we know how much we have collected for the year. Same with the non-resident revolving account. That is for those individuals. Schools will send students to our programs. If we have room in our programs and they don't have a program, it costs them less than sending the student to an out-of-district placement. So we get money that way. Nursing grant, we'll be able to journal entry $20,000. There are some operation expenses that qualified for the exterior capital account that we have. That's $45,000. And the 240 grant is the special education grant. There was still $253,000 that hadn't been accounted for yet that we would charge some tuition, some out-of-district tuitions to. And then we have $11,000 in literacy grant and purchasing freeze. We're estimating $200,000 that would have been spent by the end of the year, won't be spent. So as Donovan said, you put it all together and it's 4.5, but then the offsets bring it down to 3.122 as the deficit that we're dealing with. And as he also mentioned, the town manager and Lynn and Kyle and Don Pendleton from payroll have been tremendous working with us and worked quickly to develop a plan with us to help offset it. And as he mentioned, the biggest part of that is definitely the finance department, our finance committee reserve. But it also includes the annual $300,000 from Amazon that we are hopeful. I guess it's contingent right now on passing a inspection for it to be available this year. The select board approved the ARPA funding. We had, as I said the other night, we had intended to apply, but then there was a large, I think it was a sewer project or wastewater. Which one was it? Sewer. And it ended up, that got approved, but then it ended up that the town got back some money, so some money got put back into ARPA that it became available for us to put in that application, and that was for $380,000. The reserve we just talked about, additional money from the Special Education Stabilization Fund would be needed. The 220 comes out of the 750 that's in there. We haven't accessed it in a few years now. Leaving 530 that the town manager had planned to offset other contract increases over the next 2 years. So we're going to have to make that up in our budgets for next year and the following year if we're able to use all of that money for this year. And then there were some additional municipal surpluses that Melissa identified for $126,000. The freeze that Donovan talked about is $179,000, and then on top of the $200,000, we anticipate another $106,000 that we'll find in reductions for the rest of this year from the school department to make up that 3.122 budget. The town manager also wanted everyone to be aware that there's an impact. The August 8th storm deficit, her plan was to fund that from the general fund, but now with this deficit, she'll have to transfer that money from free cash to cover the flood deficit, of which $252,000 covered some town expenses and $203,000 had covered some school expenses from the flood damage. And then speaking of the timeline, because that's the most sensitive area, and again, just as I said, Monday night, I take full responsibility for any miscommunication and delay in this. Back in June, as I said, we met with you guys. I think we mentioned it then. We certainly mentioned it to school committee and have been talking about it a lot at public meetings about the OSD increase. We normally do a budget status report once things get settled down in the school year. There's not a lot of spending up until then. So usually end of October, beginning of November 16th. In that report, we identified the pressure points that we were seeing, and those are all the items you saw with numbers now. February 1, I did come forward with a deficit of $1.5 million for expenses, and at that point, I was focused on the expenses. Again, my responsibility, I had not focused on the salary because I didn't believe it, and I should have, that it was that large, and I thought it had something to do with not understanding Unison and it being a 27 payroll situation, and that wasn't the case. Once that we had found, and like I said, the ongoing part is that my account supervisor did make me aware of that, and I didn't believe it. Early March, we started working with the town staff because Lynn saw the same thing that my account supervisor was seeing. We worked together to try to figure out if it was accurate, and we even had a meeting. I remember being up at the board saying, this is how much is left in encumbrance, and this is what was left last year. How could it be that much of a difference? So we worked together and determined it was accurate. And then mid-March, at that point, now that we knew there was a salary deficit as well, Melissa asked me to come forward with what is the real number, what's that deficit number. So went back, came up with that number, and we got together and worked on the problem. And again, thanks to her and her staff, this is the plan that we're coming forward with. So I said a lot of this, but I think you said that not many of these costs were within our control. Go ahead, you want to say something?
I think what I said was, or what I meant was, they may not have been in your control, but I feel like they could have. One thing you said, if you go slide back. Thank you. You have February 1st, 2024 estimated expense deficit of 1.5 million after offsets. I wasn't at that school board meeting that you did, but I've watched it. I've read the minutes. I was not under the impression that it was 1.5 million after offsets. My interpretation of that was that it was $1.5 million. Now you have offsets typically of 1.3. So at that point, I think in the minutes, or maybe it was 1.7. All right. So in my mind, you already know you're 400,000. Given my interpretation of this, right, you're already $400,000 with offsets in the red. So my point being that should have been a canary in the coal mine point, right, where you saw something to do. So it's not that. It's not that they weren't foreseen in that, look, they happened, they were there. I get that. I think it's I'm trying to wrap my head around the fact that I feel like that was a canary in the coal mine. I'm just going to beat that analogy to death. Mm-hmm. And the canary died and we didn't see it, and look, if that's a wrong interpretation, I'd like to hear why. Does that make sense, Jim?
It definitely makes sense, and I'm not trying to shirk responsibility.
No, I know that.
I'm taking full responsibility. Yeah. I just want to make clear that the part of it is I want to make clear is the expenses that we incurred and were not controllable at all. I mean, you see the list. You know,
Yeah.
we have no control over the court decisions that are made, over out-of-district placement tuitions going up, out of transportation needs. You know, it was all about meeting student needs. So I just want to make that part clear. And one of the things, I have to apologize to Dave. We were doing our budget agenda meeting, and he was laying out what he wanted to see happen. You know, well, we've got to know some more information about this. And one of the things he said was we want a third-party auditor, I think is the term that you used. And I took offense to that. And, you know, I was, not that I should have, but I did. And I was getting defensive and thinking, none of this. And I absolutely 1,000% support whatever measures you want to take to make sure that the public understands that, you know, none of these expenses are other than for, you know, salaries of our employees or for legitimate expenses. So I apologize because it was more about why we have Lynn and we have Melissa and we have Kyle now who are excellent, and they're going to be more eyes on it. And I think I didn't understand that it was because people out there might think something's going on.
Yeah.
So if that's what it takes to dismiss that perception, then by all means, completely behind that. So,
He's referring to our agenda setting meeting from Monday,
Right.
when that came up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
look, I understand that, and I'm only going to speak for myself. And number one, I appreciate your forthrightness, and I appreciate you coming here and answering the questions. But I guess when you say the salaries were unforeseen, or I guess help me understand that, because I have a hard time wrapping my head around that, because you say, and I don't mean that when I say you say, I don't mean that in an accusatory way, but you didn't think, and I'm borrowing from your presentation on Monday, you didn't think, or you hoped that our students wouldn't need as many teaching assistants so far removed from COVID, right?
Correct. Correct.
But that turned out to be wrong.
correct.
Which is fine and fair, unforeseen, I get that. But certainly there was a time where you have that budget item, right, that you budgeted for, and you saw that number was creeping up towards it, right? So I guess I'm trying to understand why the alarm wasn't rang then, when you saw it approaching, so that perhaps something could have been done. That's all. That's what I'm trying to understand. Does that make sense, Jim?
No, it makes perfect sense. And, a couple of things. One, I certainly was sounding the alarm, but not effectively enough, right? And not with concrete numbers for people, because, like I said, it was changing on a regular basis. And one of the things, as I said Monday night, I didn't want to come back to the well. I didn't want to bring forward a number and then have it be even more than that. So that was my struggle. And
Yeah.
as I said Monday night, that was a bad decision on my part. And so I really, really hesitate to say this because I know how it comes across. One of the biggest mistakes I made was not asking for help. A lot of people don't know it, but this year I've been dealing with cancer. And I don't want it to come across as an excuse. I should have asked for help. But from December till March, I was going into Boston every day for radiation treatments. And so I was off my game, absolutely. I had hoped, nobody feels worse about this than I do.
I understand. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I had hoped that 14 years of what I think is really good performance could help offset that, and it helps explain why I was off my game. But I take full responsibility, whatever comes from that. But I think that it helps explain. People are like, how could this happen?
Right.
I should have asked for help. I should have asked for help from Melissa and Lynn, and from Gilly and from everybody, and I didn't. I tried to do it on my own.
Yeah, I get that. Look, number one, I appreciate the situation, and certainly I want you to know that, well, I guess I can only speak for myself, but nobody thinks you're using your health as an excuse, okay? I mean, we wish you nothing but good health. I think, you know, I want you to understand that, and you just articulated, we're just trying to understand where we are, because this, you know, this is not the norm for us, right?
Absolutely.
So we just, you know, it's our responsibility as Finance Committee to poke and prod at this stuff, and you know what I mean? So that's where we are. So I think I've dominated the questions a little bit here. So I would at this time, unless, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I didn't afford you the
Well,
off.
the only thing I want to add to this
Please.
is that, and I intend to ask this tomorrow night at our meeting, but I'm a little confused about why there aren't other checks and balances that would trigger, you know, so that even if you know, it wasn't brought forward by you, that someone else would have said, hey, you know, these budget items are exceeding forecast. Somebody should have been ringing a bell for that. And I don't for a minute believe you would have stopped that. So I'm concerned that the system has some systemic problems that should be addressed.
Yep.
That's the only thing I can really add, because I'm not, you know, my role is not operational, right? I'm a board person. So, like you guys, I get the presentations, I ask the questions, we, you know, try to do what we're supposed to do.
Yeah.
But that's something I'm wondering about.
Gotcha. I appreciate it.
And I don't mean to put you on the spot, because that's not fair, right, to ask that in this setting, but
Well, I'm expecting any question, so it's a fair question.
I guess.
And just to kind of wrap up before everyone else jumps in, again, the town manager, her staff been really great to work with. And I also, to kind of address the question, I completely agree with the recommendation to do monthly reviews with the school department budget, with the town manager and her staff, and include the school committee chair. The more eyes, the better. And then there's no question about time in reporting.
So, you know, just one more thing. I know I promised you all that I would let you ask questions, and now I'm reneging on that, so I apologize. But one last thing. When you were at the select board on Monday, one of the things you committed to them was providing monthly run reports. Is that something you think you could supply to this committee as well, just for?
Absolutely, and
Okay.
I think that, you know, that's what will be reviewed in those monthly meetings, and we could even do them, I mean, we could do them as often as we need to, but the result of that will be that run and any findings from the review of that run, and those can go to the school committee, the select board, and the finance committee.
I think that'd be great. I don't know if there's a desire to be more involved, but certainly from my perspective, that would be appreciated, Jim. So, okay, let me take a breath.
Sure.
Go ahead, Ken.
Thank you. Let me ask Dave this first question. Who's responsible for oversight of school spending? From a legal standpoint, from the way our form of government works.
So ultimately, right, the superintendent is.
But isn't that delegated by the school committee? I mean, the school committee is responsible for
right,
oversight.
well, we set a budget, right? Our responsibility.
Yeah, you're given a number. And,
Yes.
and it's up to the school committee to decide how that money is divided or how it's spent.
Well, we set a
There's
budget.
one line item in the budget that's for the schools.
No, I'm saying within.
That's what town meeting approves.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. Town
So there's
meeting-
one line item, and it's up to you guys, the school
Right.
committee, to decide how that money's spent. So don't you have an equal responsibility to catching this sort of thing early? Do you have a subcommittee, a finance subcommittee in the school committee?
We do not.
Maybe that's one thing you can do.
Yes.
And that's, and so you should be internally monitoring. Believe me, I was just chair of a school committee in a local city for 6 years. So I have some experience going through this. I did sit in your seat. And we did have a finance subcommittee, and it actually was a very important part of our managing the schools. Are you going to planning to do an investigation on how this happened?
Yeah, yes, absolutely.
All right, and just let me give you my 2 cents on that.
Okay.
Because the question I have is why? I mean, do you question Jim's presentation? Because I think this is a good presentation. It lays it out, and thank you, Jim. I mean, you took responsibility. I mean, you took full responsibility for this. Whether or not that's true, I don't know. I mean, I think there are other factors involved, and a lot of them out of control of the school. The big issue seems to be when we found out. That seems to be what this really boils down to.
Mm-hmm.
I'm hearing some rumors today. Did the superintendent get put on administrative leave?
So I placed him on administrative leave yesterday
Before you did the investigation?
in order to do the investigation.
Why I'm not
Well,
understanding that. Is
the
there- is it a trust issue,
concern, excuse me?
or Why would you do that? I mean, it's an open, your process is a public process.
Correct.
It needs to be. Did you, by the way, go into executive session before
No,
you
no, the way,
did this?
the way it works, is my understanding, the way it works is I'm allowed to do that. The school committee has to ratify it, which they, or reject it, which they can do on Thursday at our next meeting, right?
I'm
So that's-
not sure you're right, but, okay.
I'm-
I'm not going to argue with you in public, but I'm not sure you're 100% right that you can do that all by yourself without either executive session to
well,
determine with, or a vote of the school committee.
And I can send you a copy of the
Okay, I mean, you might,
contract, and you can.
oh, okay, so it may be in your contract,
Maybe
okay,
in
so
the
that wouldn't be,
contract. And
that wouldn't be
he's
a
hesitant to
Mass
speak-
General law.
He's hesitant to speak, I've been told
Yeah.
the school committee member myself, it's because he's dealing with a personnel issue now.
Usually that's taken care of first place
No,
in
no,
in
my point
executive.
is, he's dealing with a personnel issue.
I agree,
Which means
I
he
agree.
can't speak about a personnel issue
I-
at all. So if he's being reticent and giving you information, I'm just letting you know
Oh,
that it's really rigid, that he really
I don't
can't
disagree.
talk about
I
that.
Yeah,
don't disagree with that, but that's why executive session exists.
I'm saying he's in a public forum right now.
No, he's not in executive session.
No, no,
That's
no,
the
no.
very purpose, one of the very purposes of
We are not in
executive
executive
session.
session right now, we're in a public session.
No, I'm not talking about now.
Well,
I'm
that
talking
you-
about.
You were asking
but
the question,
decision.
and you were wondering why, that's all I'm saying.
The question was, why, I guess the discussion is can he do that by himself without going through
I believe the short answer
executive
is yes,
session?
but
I think that's the purpose
I
of
can
executive.
send that
But
to you so you
look,
can
I could be
see.
wrong. You may
Yeah.
have policies specific to North Andover that.
Yeah, I think-
Part of the
mean, it's very possible that I'm not
Yeah.
aware of.
Yeah.
But again.
Your point is well taken.
But my point is,
Right.
I'm concerned that the action has basically blamed him. I mean, the public mind, what they will see is that he was put on administrative leave, paid or not, doesn't matter, really, in terms of your reputation. And now you basically laid it on him. And, what's interesting is Jim has said it's his fault. I mean, a very cursory investigation might have, and let Jim talk about it. Now, I'm not saying it's your fault, Jim, by any means. I'm saying
I
it's just
am.
a whole bunch of stuff that happened to come together at once. And I liked your presentation. I think it was very informative, and it laid out the reasons. I would say just one last thing. Thank goodness we've had strong city management who, over the years, has had the foresight to put reserve funds away, in a lot of categories that allowed us to get through this without, at least for the current year, not directly affecting taxpayers.
Yeah.
I mean, that's quite an achievement, and thank you. And that's to Lynn and Melissa. You lead the organizations that are responsible for making the recommendations for this kind of funding. So I mean, certainly personally, I appreciate that.
Okay.
But I'm concerned about what just happened with the superintendent.
Ken,
So, and I'll leave it at
no,
that.
I appreciate that. I think
And we should, by the way, vote to
I
remove the 50
I
$1.5 million.
appreciate that too. I think we have to leave the personnel issues aside for now, and not go any further with those. And let's just stick to the purview of the tasks at hand.
Fine, I couldn't help it. I had to get that out. I just see such a injustice.
All right.
And it really is.
I understand your perspective
Okay.
wholly, and I
Okay,
know you
good.
well, Ken, and so I'm not
Thank-
no harm.
thanks,
But
Ken.
let's move on. All right.
I'm done then.
All right. I appreciate it, buddy. All right. Who's next?
I'm sorry, can I just
Yeah.
say one thing? There's a good reason that I take the responsibility. I mean, it's my job. And, everyone wants to look for there's got to be another reason. There's got to be another reason. And, you were asking Dave about the school committee's role. This is my 15th year in the district, and they've never had to before. And I'm not saying that's an excuse, but things have worked really well for the years that I've been here. Dr. Gilligan didn't take any different steps or roles than any other superintendent I've worked with. He had no reason to think that it was going to be a problem. I was telling him the same things I was telling everyone. Yeah, it's going to be significant. Still trying to figure out the number. As soon as I do, and in the school committee, we do budget status reports, and I did identify the deficit, and we've worked with the town before, and it just, like I said, it got away from me. And it should fall on me.
All right. Well, let's move towards other questions. Thank you, Jim. I appreciate that.
Okay, I have some questions.
Go for it, Regina.
Thank you for the presentation and your time. I would like to, opening comment, I guess, I think that the expense side, I understand is kind of unforeseen. I mean, I understand that being unforeseen. The salary side, I don't really understand how that can be so unforeseen. So I asked our finance director to pull some reports from Munis for me so that I could do my own slicing and dicing and understand what's in the salary line items. And a couple things jumped out at me. One is there seems to be a lot of reallocation of budget across the different departments, fairly significantly. For example, the administration salaries were adjusted downward by nearly $1 million, and other items like special education salaries were adjusted upwards by over $500,000, et cetera, but shifting. And
Yep.
I completely understand that. I do that in my own budget at home.
Yep.
If I spend too much in groceries, I take down somewhere else. But those seem like really large numbers. I mean, you're not, we're not filling administration roles for $1 million worth of roles. So can you help me understand, I guess, the original budget setting process? How are you setting the original number that it's so off that you're adjusting it by $1 million?
Well, the way that the budget works is you're allowed to run a deficit in a salary line. So we had to move money out in order to pay for the bills given the size of the deficit. Some of the other lines, there's a line in there for around $480,000. That was a recoding that we needed to do because the DOE decided that this should be whatever I don't know the code. Tracy would know it. But we had them in, so it looked like there was just this $480,000 sitting there, and we had to move those salaries in. So we do a lot of transfers just in order to pay the bills, and so those lines go into deficit.
Okay. So, but what kind of process is followed to set the original
Budget.
budget?
So, for instance, one of the things I have to do for tomorrow night, and then complete for May 9th, is to bring back a budget that works for next year, right? Obviously, these are issues we need to deal with for next year's budget. And so when I'm going to be coming forward with the, let's say, salaries professional, that's our biggest one. It's teachers, administrators. I had payroll give me every single employee who's here, what step and column, where will they be next year, and then make sure that the budget accommodates that. Because we also have to accommodate for longevity payments and whatever else there might be. And so given that number, what's the budget number we have? And that's how.
I mean, is that how you did it last year? That seems like how you would have to do it.
Yes. But as you saw, we've got a lot more things
Yeah.
getting paid out than just salary.
I mean, if you look at the salary total adjusted budget, and then the expended and encumbered, you or actually have a deficit of over $3 million, but then the offsets.
That's
bring
where
it
the
down.
offsets go, correct?
But I mean, that's a huge number to be up. Like for me, going forward, to be comfortable, we need to budget for the people we have employed. And
Absolutely.
not just count on offsets, because obviously the offsets are needed for all these other
Yeah.
stuff we really can't control, like the transportation of out-of-district placements and et cetera.
Yeah, we
So-
can expand at some other time. I will just say that in my experience, the biggest challenge I've had over the years is that I have to count on offsets to make the budget. For instance, we budget a certain number you'll see in tuition. Let's say it's $3 million because we're going to get $2 million or a little over $2 million in circuit breaker funding, and we're going to use the 240 grant for $400,000 or $500,000. So that accounts for going into the year tuitions. Now things can happen with those, but a lot of communities have at some point been able to incorporate the funding into the operating budget for tuition, and that circuit breaker line is a reserve for them. But we've never been there, and that.
Yeah, but I appreciate that, but we need to get there. We can't, I mean, all these inflation and, you know, the out-of-district placement price going up and whatever, like, I will not feel comfortable advising the town from a finance committee perspective that we can accept that our salaries are budgeted at a deficit. Like, that's just not.
Right, and we don't
just doesn't make
start.
sense.
Yes, right, and
'Cause there's
normally
just too many
we
unforeseen
don't.
costs, especially in today's world,
Yes,
right?
and normally
There's
we
just-
don't start there. Correct, but
Yeah.
during the year we're moving things around, and yes,
Maybe but let's not start there. I mean,
Absolutely.
we literally started
Absolutely.
with a $3
Absolutely.
million deficit. Like, that's just not, okay, all right. I don't want to hog the time. I've got other questions.
you're
Okay.
good. You're on a roll there.
So, yeah, I mean, I guess another question was around first one was how do you set the original budget? Second was how you do the reallocation. Sounds like what you're saying is you just reallocate based on where you're.
we do a lot of that. Yes,
I see that.
Yes.
That's why I'm asking. I mean, it feels like there needs to be maybe some check or balance or control on the reallocations. Like, I would make that recommendation to the school committee or to whoever is looking at these monthly reports. On the expense side, I mean, I don't really have that much to say on the expense side. It's unfortunate. Those are unforeseen things. I think the ESSER funding of $200K being used last year, I mean, I hope we should have taken that out of the budget for '24 and not relied on it. It shouldn't be there because we used it last year, so that's just a mistake, I guess, on our part. I mean, I guess I feel like my biggest concern is the go forward. I mean, I feel like thank you to the town manager and the finance director and the rest of the municipal departments, frankly, for being so collaborative and accepting the cuts, and to the community that's gonna maybe have a reduction in services in other areas to help pay for deal with this problem. But we really need to make sure that this is contained to this year, that we understand the boundaries and set a budget for next year that covers the people that we have. And I mean, that's just imperative. I just don't, and then we put controls in place. Let's see. I'm getting my comments and my question. Let me see if I have other questions. Oh, one of my questions was, is this funding needed like ASAP? Like, do we need, if we don't vote tonight, are we in dire situation, or do you need it by the end of the fiscal year?
No, we need it now in order to pay our bills. Yes, yes.
Okay.
Bills or salaries?
Well, it's like the salaries can be in deficit. We need to obviously have everything balanced by the end of the year, but we don't want to continue to move money out of salaries.
The reason I ask is like you hear, it's like, hey, you're not gonna make payroll for June. That's.
Yeah.
I-
So I guess to be more accurate, Regina, not immediately. I mean, it would be easier to manage things instead of continuing to make all those transfers. But we could continue to make those transfers, and then the 1.5 would offset the deficits in the salaries.
But a clearer path here is to have it done immediately.
Absolutely.
Yes, town manager, you may.
Even more importantly, we have a meeting with bond counsel coming up on May 29th. And we need to be able to go into that meeting, because we are going to be taking bonds for the middle school project, and be able to say that this deficit is completely funded.
Zero.
So that we're not going in with any
The
doubt.
29th.
That's May 29th.
So the short answer is yes.
Yeah,
we
so-
need this immediately.
Yes, we don't want to be in a situation where our bond rating is affected because we
Right.
don't have a plan.
Of course. Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We heard from in the Board of Selectmen meeting, or Select Board meeting, that about the cuts that the municipal side is making. Did we make any cuts or have hiring freezes or anything on a school side?
Yes, and we continue to increase the sense of urgency. We do have student needs, but there are ways to, within the schools to offset some of these, with asking staff to be more flexible with covering other staff that might be out. So we identified 200,000 so far. I'm hopeful it could be more in the purchasing freeze, and another 106,000 in some of the stuff I'm talking about. So be a little over 300,000 that will add to it.
When did you implement a freeze?
So we have had, in most years, we do a what you might call a soft freeze. I don't think I'm making that word up. But it's kind of like, only purchase those things that are absolutely necessary. There's no more toner. We have to have toner in our printers and copiers. For approval, they have to come through me for that approval. And then we put a hard freeze on. So it's been on for a while now.
Well,
And
just
it's,
like when? I mean, that's like.
yeah, so we put the soft freeze on like December,
Okay.
and then the more permanent one in February, March, right around there,
Okay.
when it became apparent. And then a hiring freeze
Yeah.
as well. And again, there could be somebody that goes out who is a fifth grade teacher. We need to have a long-term sub, so we'll get that.
Right.
But we're not filling any.
Now, obviously, there's some.
Positions.
There's something that you
Correct,
have to do about it.
correct.
No, I
Yeah.
understand that. So like I'm sorry, I'm breaking
No,
your
it's okay.
time here. So the personnel issue that, when I say personnel issue, I mean because there were salaries that you can't pay. It wasn't
Right.
because people were being hired after you were in, and that you recognized an issue, or you hired and they didn't get budgeted in? I mean,
No, these were people, so we didn't hire any new people.
like aides during the year?
No, we started the year, we finished last year, and the principals can tell you that we had a few meetings on, all right, we've got to come up with a new model. I had Marcy, our special education director, there. We've got to establish a new model that more efficiently delivers the services around the schools. And then we start the year and we have all of these new students on IEPs, and it didn't happen. And that is another thing that I should have been more diligent with.
Okay. Do you have more questions, or do you want me to?
Yeah,
jump in
sorry,
for a while? You finish.
Let me just finish. I guess my biggest concern, or a big concern is, how do we know that this is the end of it, right? How do we know that there's not going to be another, are you confident that you've identified the full extent of the problem? Because
It's a great question. I wish I could say 100%. I can tell you that it's all hands on deck in trying to go the other way, right? And avoid costs that we thought were going to happen. We could have anything happen, another homeless student at $500 a day you know, Melissa has said the same thing to me, that we could have some crazy freak snowstorm and all of a sudden it throws the plan out of whack.
Yeah.
I am confident as long as one of those crazy things doesn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to have to figure out a plan to replenish this reserve once we can deplete it to zero. Because, I mean, we're not gonna be able to continue like giving increases and so on in the budgets in the future years without really adequately replenishing this reserve budget, so that we don't find ourselves in a real dire situation if we didn't have it. And the same thing happened next year, for example.
Right.
Can I ask a follow-up question on that? I know you talked a lot about, I think on Monday night, you said you didn't want to go to the well twice and you weren't sure what the actual number was going to be, which I can appreciate. But when things are so volatile, like they have been, would we ever consider low, medium, high forecasts to understand our deficits? So in other words, low being what we're seeing today based on pacing, medium being a certain percentage increase over that, and high being the worst case scenario.
I think that I set us up for this failure over the years in not kind of providing or insisting that we have what we're now going to put in place, which is that at least monthly check with a whole bunch of people looking at it. And so I think that addresses your question, that we're going to be looking at this on a monthly basis, and there's going to be multiple people doing so. So, you know, that group would decide what level we're at and what might need to happen in order to, you know, adjust if we need to.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I think I've pretty much asked my questions. I want to thank you for your honesty and taking responsibility. I think that's very commendable. I think that you are not the top of the house, though, so I don't think ultimately it was your responsibility. I think it was the person above you's ultimate responsibility. I appreciate you taking responsibility, but I don't hold you solely accountable, so I just want you to know that.
Yeah, I have a hard time not, because, like I said, I don't know how many superintendents I've worked for. I think it's 4, and it's not been any different for any of them, and it wouldn't have been any different, I don't think. But you know, everyone's entitled to their opinion. But I have a hard time not taking the responsibility.
All right. I was going to start on this a little different. Again, we really appreciate you being here very much from the bottom of my heart. It's good. It's to have you be so upfront and honest and doing what you're doing. But one of the things I was going to ask is, you know, when you develop your budgets and you're going through day to day, you know, who are the people that are backing you up? I mean, who takes a look at what you're doing? Is there a group of you who says, okay, yeah, much like what you were saying, you know? And it seems like that really isn't the case. It's your budget.
It's 2 of us. It's myself and Tracy McKellar is our account supervisor.
Okay.
It's the 2 of us.
Okay. So as you're going through this year and you see that there's having some issues, but also you're having some issues. You're having personal issues. I mean, and nothing minor. This is pretty significant. It's not nothing what you've been going through. I know I've had family members do the whole thing. It's not nothing. And so to recognize yourself that maybe I'm not paying attention as much as I should or thinking along the same lines as I should because I am overwhelmed by another huge responsibility, which happened to be your health at the moment. That's not nothing. And then, like Regina alludes to, there are the people around you who are in charge, who you would think would say, this is kind of a tough time for this extremely important employee. And they're not present a fair amount of the time here because of these issues. And it didn't seem like there was someone there having your back or calling for someone to say, like, we need somebody else here to be doing these things for periods of time. And this is not a question to you, this is more a statement from me after finding out what you were going through and what has happened. I mean, and a case in point, when you came before us and presented a budget, I mean, I was kind of surprised because it wasn't what I had it really wasn't what I have seen in the past. I mean, there are errors on it. You know, it wasn't right. You hadn't taken out any of the shared services. So you had actually put them in the 25 budget. The 25 budget was wrong. And it was like, you know, and when we say, you know, this isn't right, you know, well, what is in the shared budget? These were questions that weren't answered. I mean, I could see that there was a problem then. I think everybody could see. It's like, what's going on here? Why isn't this budget as it should be? And we got that resolved. You know, Lynn stepped in and she said, like, hey, this is the deal. And she made me understand it a little better. But that was a little disturbing. And I was kind of concerned about, like, why isn't the budget accurate? Why isn't it like it should be? So again, those are comments by me. But, I mean, so basically what you're saying, it's the two of you, and that's it. Do you ever go to Dr. Gilligan and say, like, hey, this is the budget that we're looking at right now. I'm having issues. What do you think? Does that happen on a regular basis? Is that what we're hearing?
Yeah, like I said, you know, it was the same message I had, that it's going to be significant, and continue as I continue to work through it without giving him a number of what it was, but just letting him know. And he, you know, there'll be people who will tell you in town that he indicated, well, we're going to have a significant deficit this year. But I didn't give him a number. You know, I have a lot to take responsibility for, but I have to push back a little bit on the, what you call the shared costs.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Because we hadn't yet been informed that, you know, we had an approved budget from the town manager, and there was going to be a mechanism for that to come out. It wasn't necessarily our responsibility to do that at that point yet.
So you didn't know that wasn't something that you couldn't include in the 2025 budget?
I knew that it wasn't going to be there, but I didn't know that I needed to present. I was presenting what the school committee had approved, and the money was then going to come out of those lines. And it hadn't, you know, I mean, I was just showing what the budget was. I didn't think the money was staying there. I knew it was coming out. I think I said that, and you guys were asking, well, why is it still in there? It's just because the mechanism hadn't taken effect yet.
Okay.
You say that without seeming
Yeah.
like you.
Well, it's just,
Believe it.
it's, you know, it wasn't, you're coming in front of the finance committee and it wasn't proper. I mean, even if you had it in there, you should have been with the caveat that, like, hey, we've got another issue, another portion of the budget that is new. I mean, you should have known about the shared services and what they were and the dollars, and then it should have.
But I
been-
did.
Yeah,
I
but
did.
You didn't?
I did.
But you still put it in the 2025 budget, that's what I'm saying. I know, we're saying the same thing over and over again.
Okay.
But, anyway, I understand, but I consider that kind of a flawed presentation. But, the other thing is, when we talk about, SPED and out-of-district students and stuff like that, and those sorts of things, and I remember from being on the school committee, I mean, every year, it could be traumatic. Some years were worse than others, but some years was just like, you know, you take a deep breath and you see these, you know, a lot of issues coming up. So I'd like to say that even though they're always unexpected, it's like the expected unexpected. You always know that there's going to be some dramatic thing happening in that arena. And I hope going forward that, as others have said, that there's a different mechanism for facing that. I mean, the SPED special account was the cushion for that, but that obviously isn't working, especially if you're going to that well constantly.
It's if anything good comes out of this, and there's a way to better handle that. I know that's kind of. I know Melissa wanted to get away from the Special Education Stabilization Fund and have the finance reserve, as long as we replenish it.
Yeah.
Kind of handle those. It can be significant. I mean, this is the most significant year I've seen with regards to it, because we started off with the OSD increase. I've seen years where the other things that take place, the court decisions, we've had to deal with, and that's why that stabilization fund was set up in the first place.
Right.
Right.
But yes, it would be good to have something. If it's the finance reserve, then
Yeah.
that's fine. But yeah, there could be another year like this. Let's hope.
Yeah, well, that's
There
just it.
isn't.
I mean, you can consider every year, this could be a year like this. You know, so it's the change, there has to be a dramatic change in the development of the budget and how you address it. And to further on from that, because of what we're going through now and the cuts that you have to make, what do you see as the possible impact on personnel for 25?
Yeah, so, like I said, I have to bring forward a plan for tomorrow night. We've already talked about with Pam and the principals, getting that, there's nothing like a sense of urgency to get some activity around some things, right?
Yeah.
And so, and it's interesting because I haven't been keeping it to myself. I've told the teaching assistant representatives and the teacher representatives that we've got to do a better model on the TAs, that it was getting out of hand. So we have got to come up with something, absolutely, that is more efficient and doesn't require as many teaching assistants as we have in the district.
Yeah.
We do have some good class sizes that allows us the ability to not fill, especially elementary teachers who are leaving the district, who are retiring. So there's opportunity there.
I see.
Yep. We have, we submitted our claims for circuit breaker, and we got to get that confirmed, but that's a little over 700,000 more for next year that we get than we got this year. So, it all starts to add up, and then we just have to make sure, as Regina was saying, that we've carried forward all of the costs, and here's what's available, and they match.
Okay. All right. So just to, I'm going to wrap this up and let somebody else take some time. I had a lot more, but a lot of you have already answered a lot of my questions. I am definitely, Dave, very much in support of an audit. I think that's a good move. And to your point about the reasons why, I think it's a general, just allaying of fears. That's all. It's like, I don't think that there's anything underhanded. It'd be hard to imagine. However, we're kind of a closed community here. Everybody knows each other. We've been working together for a very long time, and that is certainly not true for the general population. They really don't know. Perhaps the only time that ever particularly paying attention is when it hits a headline saying, superintendent of schools is, on paid admit. That's when they're going to look, and people are going to say, okay, who did what? And that is the reason that you have an outside auditor in, so they can say, these are the reasons. And so the general public can understand that, yes, this is what's happening and going on. So I don't think it's a comment on you or on Dr. Gilligan. And I certainly have appreciated all your work. We always work together very well.
Mm-hmm.
It was really, this whole thing is crushing. It really is, and upsetting. So, good job, Mr. Chair of the school committee, for doing something extremely difficult. I'm sure that must have been very difficult for you to do. So,
Thanks,
sure.
Chris. If we could, if I could just add to one thing, somebody mentioned it at the select board meeting on Monday, and I thought it was a really good idea, and I'm hoping that you guys did too, that to put your budget in ClearGov.
yes.
I think that was a really good idea. We, as a committee, I think I can speak for the committee because I've heard almost everybody at this table say it, have really appreciated that on the town side. And I think it gives that visibility and access to, the general
Yep.
public here, what's happening. And I think just, to me, that's for lack of a better term, an easy win. I really think it is, and I would strongly encourage you to do that. So, again, I have once again grabbed the microphone. I apologize. Brianna, any questions?
I do have a list of questions.
Okay.
So maybe we can start with the out-of-district tuition variance. I know you mentioned, and this is more just to clarify for the public who might be listening, I know you mentioned that a big part of that was the 14% increase that the state allowed. Can you talk about what portion that was versus what portion was because of new students that were now being out of district?
Yeah, it's interesting. The distribution is much different. We have, it was 2. I think right now we have 1 less student than we did last year, costing us $1.2 million more. 700 and something thousand was the impact of the OSD, and then the rest of it was those decisions where we became responsible for students that we, in some cases, didn't even know about, but they were determined North Andover is the hometown, and they are residential, and the residentials range from $200,000 to $300,000 per placement.
Okay, thank you. And sort of related, I guess, you also talked about there's just a magnitude of new students on IEPs, and that was part of the challenge with the salaries. I'm curious, what's our hypothesis for why that's happening, and is there a theme? Like, are all these students on IEPs, or a certain percentage of them, needing reading support? Is a certain percentage needing SEL support? Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I wish I could. That's definitely a great question. I'm not sure that anybody has the answer. I think people are starting to see trends and recognize trends, but no real definitive answers yet, at least that I'm aware of. I mean, those people who are more directly involved with that might answer differently, but as far as I know, we don't have the definitive answer. I mean, we're still dealing with, how far removed from the COVID now are we? And we're still dealing with many more behavior issues and SEL issues than we had pre-pandemic. And so we're still trying to grasp, what is it going to look like going forward?
Yeah, and I'll speak for myself, but I think it's incredibly important that we look for trends and then go one level deeper. Why are these trends happening, and how do we address them as a community? So at the end of the day, if we don't fix fundamentally the problem with meeting our students' needs, this is only going to continue.
Right.
And so I really think this is important that we take a look at the trends.
Yep.
I guess my other question for you, or comment, I'll just make, Dr. Gilligan mentioned on Monday night, he was talking about the state, and we were under the assumption that the state would be providing some assistance with that raise in out-of-district tuition. He said in a counter comment, he didn't think that the state understood the magnitude of the costs. I guess my question then is, why were we banking on that support?
So they definitely indicated that there would be some attempt to mitigate the impact of that increase. They did establish, and it's interesting because I don't know yet until the next week or two how much they're going to be able to help with what they established. There's something called extraordinary relief for the circuit breaker program that you get the following year. If you're 25% more in claims, then you're going to get a bump the following year. The one that they put in place a few months ago, and we participated, we put our application in, we've been told that you're eligible without telling us for how much, or they don't even know how much money they have to fund this, but it's a emergency relief program, and you get the money in the same year. So that's what they've done. I don't know if that's going to put a dent in the $700,000 that it impacted us. It remains to be seen.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to hog the mic for a little bit, if that's
That's fine.
okay too. Go ahead.
I'm going to answer the special ed question.
Go right ahead.
Pam Lathrop, Assistant Superintendent for Teaching and Learning. Nice to meet you all. I just want to go back to your question about why we might be seeing students who are being referred to for special education testing, or what our trends might see. And this is not a definitive answer, but I can say that I think it's important to note that the state enacted a law this year, the dyslexia law, for all students in, I think it's K through 3, that we have to have a screener for dyslexia, and then we send home a parent report indicating if their child may potentially might be something that we're looking at, and then we put together a plan for the parents. We have tried to do a lot of work in terms of explaining what that plan will look like and some of the supports that we can do in-house, but it can feel alarming to parents when you receive that report at home and being concerned. It's not an immediate need to test, and that's what we're looking at. And that's not what the law is why the law was put in place, but I do think that we are seeing some requests from some families to move forward and look at testing. What that law was to put into place is what's our response to intervention for those students. So some of the things that Dr. Gilligan and the leadership team and I have been working with is we have brought in some new systems and along with Marcy. So Marcy Bocuzzi, who is the Director of Special Education, and I have worked really closely this year looking at that general education and special education and looking at Tier 1 support, Tier 2 support, Tier 3 support. So that's sort of like what the core, what everybody gets, what some kid gets, and a supplement to the core, and then maybe something outside of the general classroom. But I do think that that probably has had something to do with it. And then post-COVID, we have seen students who have come back to school. We're still continuing to see post-COVID in terms of SEL and what our supports in terms of, we have 2 district programs that support students through what we might consider traumatic experiences or SEL supports as well.
And when did this dyslexia law go into place?
August of, what year are we in now? August of 2023. So this is the first year that we have sent the letters home. Now we have, and we use DIBELS as our screener, which is a screener that the Department of Education sees as an appropriate screener. We have partnered with M-Class, which is a sort of a computerized, a bigger, more robust part who uses DIBELS to power their program, and we are testing all of our students K-5 this year, which allows us to get some more concrete results on our students. And we're also looking at, we receive funding through federal grants as well. And so we are looking at our Title I schools and what we can do to support those schools because Title I gives us the opportunity to not supplant in those schools, but to supplement. So saying they get what everybody in the district gets and they get something more because of their status as Title I schools.
Okay. Sorry, a couple more follow-up questions. So this law came out in 2023, August 2023. Did our budget consider what some of the ramifications from this law might be, or was that another miss?
I don't think it's a miss because I wasn't here, I will say that, but I did budget in another district for it, so I don't think it was a miss because we had already budgeted for the DIBELS, which is an appropriate screener. We had that in place. This district was already considered a forefront district in terms of the science of reading and had already almost had a full implementation in a pilot year of science of reading. And they had done, Kristen Ando, who's the Director of Humanities, along with Marcy Barcuzzi and Lorraine Marks, who was here before me, had done a lot of professional development with the teachers in terms of literacy skills. So I believe the district was prepared to address the needs of the students who might be having some deficits in those areas. I think what no district, even the one that I used to work for, was prepared for was that seeing the reports could potentially have raised parent request for testing.
Got it. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I was going to pivot now to homeless transportation, unless anybody else in the committee had questions related to the IEP
Go ahead.
increase. Okay, great. So I know on Monday night you talked a lot about homeless transportation. There was a lot of back and forth around how do we get costs down and lots of great recommendations that were put forth. I'm just curious, and this is really wild idea, so that's my disclaimer here. Is there a way that we can co-fund these transportation costs with other districts that may have students going in the same general direction?
Homeless, it would be very difficult because they are just all over the place. We do that and have done it for years in the out-of-district placement transportation, where one of the vans might be going to a particular school, and we have a couple of students, and Methuen or Andover have a couple of students, and the cost of that van gets divided by the number of students. So it's definitely a lower cost for us that they're adding other students from other districts. So we do take advantage in that regard. The homelessness would be difficult just because, like I said, they're everywhere. And we certainly are looking for opportunities. One of the things that we've talked about over the years and looked at over the years is that does it make sense to do your own transportation? And it's never been even close to making sense, but maybe you can carve out of district transportation. And we're going to look at the possibility of does it make sense to purchase those vans, because they're not the big buses, and get some part-time employees, drivers, maybe retired employees. So we have to look at it. I don't know if that still would be a better business model, but we have to look at it.
Got it. Okay.
I have a further question on the homeless transportation. I pulled up the law.
Yep.
And it says that the cost has to be shared equally between, the community where the child lives and our community have to come to agreement on the cost, but if we can't come to agreement on sharing the cost, then it should be equally shared. So are we equally sharing? The one that you said is $500, is the other community also paying $500? It's actually $1,000, or?
No, well, when that applies, when there's not another district involved, like if somebody is in Fitchburg, and that student has never gone to school in Fitchburg, that's just where they're laying their head for the night, then they're not responsible. We are for the transportation of that student.
And how long does that change at any point if the child is sleeping in Fitchburg for a year?
It used to be that once a child changed level, then you were no longer responsible. But they changed that so that as long as the student is continuing to go to school in your district, you're responsible. You're going to give a clarification?
It was basically the same thing. So the homeless has changed. There are, and if you have it there, it probably says it there. It's when they have a fixed and stable environment, they are no longer considered homeless. So even if they are not necessarily owning that home, if it's a fixed and stable environment, you can make a case. You do have to appeal to DESE if the parents don't, or if the family is not agreeing with you that it's a fixed and stable environment, you can make an appeal. So that's part of my job is to oversee the homelessness, as well as DCF. So I think that our transportation, we transportate the homeless students. So we do typically cost share with the other district. But if you have a DCF placement, so if a student, if one of our students is placed in a DCF placement, then we are solely responsible for the transportation of that student. And it is trickier than you think to cost share, to look for ride shares with other school districts. We have been trying specifically for that one, that's $500. And we are actually now sharing a van with Greater Lawrence Tech. But you have to make sure that, both school districts agree to the same rules in terms of how you're hiring vans and what that looks like and what drivers. And then if we have X amount of students, let's say, that are living in a nearby town like Methuen, we'll send obviously one bus to pick up maybe 7 kids or something like that. But the bus company will then charge us for more children that are putting on the bus. But it's tricky with homeless. And the state understands that. I can't think of her name right now, but there's a new person that's overseeing the homelessness in the Department of Education, and she's met with the homeless liaisons for the district. It was one of the things we all brought up, that all of our budgets are empty. We have nothing left, and we are seeing more and more students who are becoming homeless and more students who are in DCF care. So the state understands, but they don't, there wasn't like a quick answer for what they're going to do to help us with this relief.
Thank you. I guess my only other comment, and we've talked a lot about this, so I won't keep going on it, but or harping on it. We talked about the increased needs for subs and TAs and how we thought that at this point we were going to get back to pre-COVID levels. But the reality is we haven't had, at least to my knowledge, any signs that have pointed to we are getting back to pre-COVID levels with our children's needs. So I guess I just don't understand that assumption.
That's fair.
That's all I have.
All right, thanks. Jim, actually, can I ask a favor of you? Could you put the thing back up so that I can talk to Keith if he has any
Oh,
questions?
to stop
Yeah,
projecting, absolutely.
Thanks. Sorry, I meant to
the-
ask you that
Get
earlier.
the
I
deficit
apologize.
word down, yes, definitely.
And hopefully, if we need the presentation again, we can always get back to it. But I appreciate that. Eva, any questions from you?
So a lot of things have been answered from my questions. One of them I did wanted to ask you if you had someone looking at the books, but you did say you had an account supervisor.
We do, yes.
Yeah. And the only thing I wanted to say is that I don't want you to feel bad that this happened, even though I know you are feeling guilty over it. We're not the first community to do this. I came from a community that was 4 million in the red, and it was actually the school that did it. But thanks to Lynn and Melissa and Kyle for figuring out this plan. That's awesome, because the other community had to borrow money, which hurt the bonding, and we're avoiding that here. So I just want you guys to know that this isn't like uncommon. This is not unheard of.
Mhm.
So I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, and I have to, thank you for saying that. I have to say that it's, you know, it's been a rough year in a lot of respects. But it wasn't that I was hesitant. Like I said, I wanted to make sure it was right. It wasn't that I was hesitant with the reception that I would get. I didn't question that at all, and I knew that Melissa and Lynn would do whatever they could to help out. So that was never a concern of mine.
That's great. Thanks, Eva. Dustin?
Brianna stole pretty much all of mine.
She did.
I should have jumped in
you
right
know,
before she did.
I've used that
Almost-
excuse, Dustin.
No. Hey.
Come on.
I see him checking stuff.
All right, fair enough. Fair enough. Keith, our remote friend, can you hear me? Yeah. Well, actually, our technical advisor.
I can hear you guys.
You can?
No, she
I
literally.
can.
I thought that was him. I thought
He just spoke.
I heard him, yeah.
No, she literally answered all the questions.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, Keith, we can.
The only thing that I would add, and at the risk of sounding eerily familiar to all of what's been covered, is I'm just keenly aware of hearing what the steps are moving forward. I really want to have a clear understanding. You know, it's obviously there's nothing that we can do now, but to make a bad situation worse, I think it's important that we are super clear on what the steps are moving forward for us to avoid this in the future. And that's what I'm looking forward to hearing.
So, yes, I can tell you the first step is to cover the deficit, and this is a big part of that. And as we mentioned, an audit, an external audit being done. And then going forward, we have to make sure that we adjust the FY25 budget so that it starts on budget. And finally, at least monthly review of the burn, and with the reporting going out to Finance Committee, School Committee, and Select Board of what the status is each month.
I'm going to add one thing to that, if I could.
Sure.
I'm going to request, and it'll be up to our committee to approve it, but I'm going to request that we also take a good look at our mechanisms and to make sure that this is not a systemic problem like I added earlier, like I mentioned earlier.
Good. Thanks. Keith, is that satisfactory? To at least
Yes.
to your question?
Yes.
Okay. Anything else, Keith?
No, as I mentioned, I think everybody has covered quite well all the concerns, and I'm comfortable with the discussion that's happened thus far. As I mentioned, I'm super aware and interested in hearing what our steps were moving forward, and so far what's been discussed is enough to allay my concerns.
Great. Thanks, Keith. Does anybody else have any additional questions for the chairman or assistant superintendent? No. All right. Well, I would like to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for coming up here tonight. Jim, I would especially like to thank you. I think Chris said it earlier, but we have always worked well with you. I appreciate you coming in here and answering all of our questions. You shared some personal information tonight that you definitely were not required to do, but I appreciate that. I think from my perspective, I have a lot of respect for you, and you coming here and answering and standing up has been very good. So thank you. I think you and I may have a difference of opinion on how folks should have been notified and when, and that's fair. And I don't that's fine. I think that's healthy. But thanks a lot. I think the one thing I would just repeat really is that I know there's a chance that some folks may have thought we veered from our mandate here, but I would respectfully just repeat what I said at the beginning, which is that the Finance Committee's biggest responsibility is to review and consider any matter that may have longer short-term fiscal impact on the town and make objective recommendations to town. So I think we have and will continue to remain squarely within our purview. So thank you both very, very much. Appreciate it. What I would like to do next is to invite our town manager up and give our committee. Oh, you want to put the timeline back up? And I would like to give the committee an opportunity to ask Melissa any questions, as her and her team were the designers of the plan here, the remediation plan, I guess. And first, I would offer you a chance to give us any comments that you may have.
Thanks, I appreciate everybody here today. I just wanted to clarify a couple of things that I heard, maybe abate some worries, and then share like a crazy idea I had while I was sitting back there for the fiscal year 26 budget. So first I just, because that's how I work. First, the Finance Committee reserve is funded by the general fund. So if we use it all this year, it's being reappropriated again next year. So in the past, we've come to you and we've pledged to pay back. If you think of, for instance, we asked for the $100,000 for the senior center furniture. Yep. We knew we were getting eventually that from Amazon, so I was very comfortable saying that we'll go right into free cash and back to the Finance Committee reserve. But we are going to continue to fund that at the $1.5 million. So this is a good use of it, and we continue to appreciate all of your hard work on delegating those funds. As I shared with you during, I think when we reviewed the fiscal policies, I am not a fan of the special ed stabilization account because I don't think it makes sense to fund costs that really are recurring using reserves, right? So if there's a policy that every single year we are allowed to go to a reserve fund, then we're doing something wrong in our budget, right? So we need to think of another way to deal with this. So what I was thinking when I was sitting back there, and I didn't share this with Lynn, so she's probably going to fall out of her chair in a minute, but she'll be gone. So
I was just going to say, I don't think Lynn will be that worried.
She's like, perhaps in fiscal year 26, we use the revenue from Medicare to fund a Finance Committee reserve special ed account. And so we would have just a special account that would be held by the Finance Committee reserve, and it would just be for special ed. And that way we would be able, it would be a recurring account, it would be funded by the general fund, and we wouldn't have these kind of worries about these structural deficits anymore. And I think that that would be a really smart way to move forward.
That is a good idea, and we look forward to discussing it more with you.
Yeah, I think it would be great. So I did want to just address the timeline because I think there might be a mistake. And I will admit that the last 10 days have been a little bit of a blur, but I just don't want people to think that we've had these numbers since March. So on February 1st, we had the budget pressure points email. Jim will tell you I had a small stroke when we received the email, fell out of my chair, lost my mind, and then slowly calmed back down, and just shared that, I had expected that deficit to be a few $100,000, and we had kind of a conversation about how I was concerned because we were deficit spending with permission from the Department of Revenue for the August 8th state of emergency, right? So, I had that in my mind, and right, we were still kind of in the heat of the snow, and I was worried. But from that point, I think the March date should actually be April, and I just don't want people to think, oh my God, they've known since March these exact numbers and that we didn't share them, because that's not the case. So April 2nd, we had a meeting. The finance team, the school admin team, just kind of talking about our concerns, no sharing of numbers really at that point, because we were still trying to wrap our hands around that. During the first 2 weeks in April, Jim and I went back and forth a bunch, right? Talking about, when are we going to have them? And Jim was really digging in, trying to make sure he had a great number. Sunday, April 15th at 8 p.m., he sent me the updated numbers for the deficit with the salary numbers in them. Monday, April 16th at 10 a.m., we met and started kind of creating this plan. That was when I sent the select board a letter just saying we're in a deficit, and I expect that I'll have a plan over the next couple of days. We met pretty much nonstop on the 16th, 17th, and 18th, 2 tin cans and a string pretty much. And then April 19th was when the formal letter documenting the plan to all the boards came out. So I think you probably meant to write April there and mistakenly wrote March. I just didn't want people to be like, oh my God, they knew the numbers in March.
No, and what I was trying to convey is that I was trying to come up with that the accurate number that you had said, okay, we're going to get back together once you have that. I put late March. I think you said April 2nd was when we started that conversation about when can we get together to review this. Yeah, and I said, well, I got a couple more things that I need to figure out, and then we can get together.
Yeah, and I appreciate that Jim really wanted to have a full number. We talk about this all the time, right? That there's so much anxiety about having to go back to town meeting to ask for money for a construction project. We have to go back to anybody having to ask for money because honestly, it looks like we don't have a good grasp on what's happening. So I appreciated his need for accuracy. I just didn't want my board or the public to think that we had like these final numbers in March and we just didn't share them because that's certainly not
we
the
definitely
case.
didn't.
Yeah.
Right, I'd like to add too, the last time the school committee met was April 2nd.
Yes.
Or April 4th, sorry, April 4th. So we haven't even had a meeting since any of this has
that was
happened.
determined, correct.
So.
Can I ask a quick question?
Of course.
Fiscal year 26. Listening to what Dr. Mealy had to say about, what happened with the schools and all these expenses that are just like outrageous. I mean, there's the anomalies, but then there's others that are not truly anomalies. They just seem to be consistently growing and growing and growing. So it sort of begs the question, it doesn't appear at the moment, I know, horrible words coming out of my mouth, that we're really not funding the schools appropriately at the moment. I mean, maybe we didn't know we weren't doing it. Obviously, we didn't know. But going forward, looks like they can't exist on what they have right now. Am I wrong in that assumption?
So the last 2 years, the schools have seen 5.5%
Oh,
increases.
I know that
right?
they've seen, I totally
and
appreciate the increases. I do,
Yeah,
I do.
we've continued to invest in them over the last year since I've been here. I have, I think, probably obnoxiously continued to say that fiscal year 26 is going to be a bad year.
Yes.
It's not going to be good.
I know you have said that,
Yes,
yes.
and fiscal year 27 is not going to be good.
Yeah.
And if we were going to have any substantial new growth in fiscal year 26 or 27, they'd be in front of the planning board, they'd be pulling permits, and they'd be building, and they're
Yeah.
not. So to think that fiscal year 26, we were going to have some huge investment in any of our departments, we're not. We're going to need to maintain level service and probably figure out some new exciting revenues to find. But I just want to be, and I'll continue, I know when people, I get criticized, I think sometimes because people say she's so conservative in her forecasting. But these are the
is
reasons
why.
why, right?
Right.
Because we're able to help when we need to. We're able to plan for things. But fiscal year 26 and 27 are not going to be banner years.
Yeah, no, it's,
But isn't fiscal year 25 also going to be a problem? I mean, we just voted on a recommended budget that had, 62 million in funding for the schools, and that was like level services basically, right? But
Correct.
but we need more, because we had budgeted 60 last year and we're over on salaries, just 3 million.
So I was going to say, to be fair, there's 2 steps to determine if, what impact the amount we have on our ability to provide the education. First one is, what impact will we see in order to get to the start of the year on budget? And then are we able to then stay on budget for the year? So to be fair, to answer your question, those are 2 things that are going to happen. First step, what's the plan? And then how well does it meet? Does it work?
yeah. I mean, I'm just thinking it's like kind of a rethink of like, okay, we're good, we've got enough, it seemed to be really comfortable. And that's how you started off the year. I think we're good. We might have
Yep.
some blips here, and obviously, it was not. It wasn't enough money to fund the schools this year. I mean,
So, right, and like I said, this year is going to
That's
be very
not as
telling.
tightly configured. Yeah.
Because if you think about it, we had a plan in place to bring on additional positions, support services especially, that recovery funding paid for and ESSER money paid for, and the increases that Melissa talks about was offsetting those. But then at the same time, inflation went crazy, and the student needs have only increased.
Yep.
So it remains to be seen.
Yeah.
But, sorry, I know we're going back to the heart of the meeting
You're
now
right.
with this comment, but you say, but student need increase, so because the student needs required 10 more teaching assistants or whatever, we just hired them even though we didn't have a plan for how we were gonna pay for them?
We didn't hire them, no. My intent was to decrease the number that we had, and we were not able to do that.
So,
Oh.
you thought people would
So we
leave.
knew we were in a deficit, but we thought we were gonna.
Correct.
okay.
People were going to
Correct.
be leaving the payroll.
Correct.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh, boy.
Any other questions for our town manager?
I'll just say I appreciate your consideration of this item. It's very important to us that we get this plan in place prior to town meeting, prior to meeting with bond council, that it doesn't affect our ability to do the middle school, Kittredge, Franklin, Atkinson, the fire station. So,
I just have one question. I assume you looked at what, within free cash, what you could have used for this. Do you go through and scrub through, like the school budget or maybe even the municipal budget, to look for what you could characterize as one-time expenses, and to pull some of that money out so you could use free cash? I mean, is that just a normal thing you would do in a case like this?
yeah, so we budget pretty much everything that is a one-time expense through free cash. And, we're leaving free cash, I think, uncomfortably, for me, low this year due to some capital expenses that we didn't anticipate. So for instance, the track's $1 million. Track wasn't on our capital improvement plan, but we cannot have a track, right? So there were certain things that we just had to do this year. Any capital items that are $50,000 or below, we do have in our operating budget, and we do that so that we make sure we always have the funds available to get new cruisers and buy new trucks, right? So those are kind of best practices that we have in place. If you look at our fiscal year 25 budget, there are some things in there that were one-time expenses that we actually pulled out this year. So for instance, we have a couple of large retirements, which we knew were coming, because what we do basically is we ask our departments, do you anticipate any retirements this year? And we knew that this was a very unusual year. So typically we budget $25,000 for retirement payouts. This year we had so many people, I think we need 220. We needed 220. So that we actually funding using free cash. But typically, I would never advocate to use free cash to offset a budget deficit like this. Really, bond council would not appreciate us doing that, because it's really not a one-time cost, it's a recurring cost, right? Salaries are never a one-time cost. So, we really look at it as like true
No, I mean,
one-time costs.
You're doing
Yeah,
what I would
we
hope
try.
you would be
Okay.
doing, so.
And I think, just to kind of reframe some things, this reminds me so much of like the 2010, 2012 timeframe, when the schools were getting a ton of federal funding, and that federal funding kind of went away, and they struggled, right, to get back to normal. And we did it, right, back in the 2010, 2012 timeframe. I think we could be in a similar situation to that right now, because we relied on those ESSER funds so much for payroll. We weren't forced to do that as much on the town side, right? Like, we hired a public health nurse, we hired a social worker, but those were things that we were able to kind of move off. So I'm hopeful that as we kind of continue to transition, we may see that return to normalcy.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all very, very much. I think here, at the end of the day, I think the Finance Committee wants to be part of the solution and to be a partner with the schools, with the town. So having said all of that and poked and prodded at everyone pretty deeply, I think that leads us to our next item, which is a vote on the use of the Finance Committee reserve for fiscal year 24 school deficit. So,
Before you do that, do we need to vote to suspend the rules?
we do need to vote to suspend the
For the
rules.
special ed one.
Yes,
Because of the time?
because of the
Because
time.
we're doing it, having a presentation and a vote at the same
On the
meeting.
same, so I would entertain a motion from someone on that first.
Say it and I'll do it.
You say it. Doesn't work that way.
I move, what, do you want to do them one at a time?
Yes,
Do we have to suspend them,
yes,
on
because I would
both?
like to have the town manager come back up and talk about the special ed stabilization account. So,
okay, so you want to do it in the finance committee reserve first?
Yes,
Okay, so I move to suspend the rules for, so that we may place a vote on the finance committee reserve to be put towards the school 2024 deficit.
thank you. Motion made by Chris. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Regina. Thank you. Any discussion on the suspension of the rules? All right.
I do have one more question.
No, just kidding, just kidding.
And this, again, it's minor, but I think important for our community to hear. Why tonight versus Friday or next Monday? To vote tonight, like, is there?
Well, so I think I can answer that one. This was the, you know, when we scheduled this meeting, we didn't know, you know, we knew we had to meet to do these votes. And this was the opening in the schedule that worked, quite frankly. It turns out now that it's appropriate timing because they need the money, we need to do this
By the
now.
29th, and
Yeah.
today is the 24th, so.
Yeah. Okay.
So, I mean, like, we could schedule another meeting tomorrow, but
Okay. It's such a large amount of
agree.
money, and to make a decision right now after hearing all these different pieces, I'm struggling with that a little bit.
Yeah,
I like to
getcha.
sleep on things, especially when it's this much money.
I don't blame you. I really don't. I mean, part of, for me, it's because of my faith in the town management. Honestly, I mean, that's part of it, and I think we're really lucky. I mean, I feel lucky that that's like how I feel about it, because I've been doing it for a long time too, on varying committees, and that's not always the case, particularly between the schools and the municipal side. There hasn't always been that faith or that good communication, any good faith at all. So, so this is pretty nice. And so that's why I feel more comfortable to do it, because I think that our town manager, if she thought we needed another day, you know, she would said, take a day, if that's what you need, but she did not say that. So, I mean, and she's actually the one that I'm listening to right now.
Yeah.
That's just, that's the way I feel
That's-
that, but that's not necessarily your experience.
Yeah,
so.
that's fair, and I appreciate that. I guess
Yeah.
my other consideration here is it doesn't give our community the opportunity to make public comment on what they heard tonight before our
Yes,
vote.
you're right.
And so I think that is also important as we think about if we want to suspend these rules or not.
Okay.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, so there's a timing issue here in terms of rules and regulations and when school committee can meet and discuss. And so if this isn't voted on tonight, then we may have to consider other actions, right? Because we don't have a whole lot of time left to be able to, A, make sure we can pay for this year, and B, budget for next year.
Based upon the school committee's meeting schedule and the rules and regulations around.
Right, of
that.
course, we can meet more often too, but there was 48-hour meeting notice. So
Gotcha.
it would go into next week. And
Okay.
that's, I think, part of the reason for the
Yeah,
urgency.
that is true. It's a 48-hour
I see.
meeting notice.
Okay.
I forgot about that. You're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't realize that either.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, thank you, Brianna. I think those were all good points. Any other discussion on the suspension of the rules? All right, well then, we're gonna go with a roll call vote on, excuse me, on just the suspension of the rules right now. So, Chris Allen,
Yes.
Dustin Silk,
Yes.
Brianna Stetson,
Yes.
Keith Cheney,
Yes.
Eva Pastor,
Yes.
Ken Gray,
Yes.
Regina Keaton,
Yes.
and the chair also votes yes. So we have now suspended our rules, and I would accept a motion, another motion with regard to the Finance Committee reserve.
You get to do that, Regina. Here. And that's the number.
Thank you. I will make a motion that we allocate the finance committee reserve for FY '24 of 1.5 million to cover the school deficit.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Second by Ken. Okay, we are now going to discuss the vote. Is there any discussion?
I would just like to say, I really, as I was thinking about this, as I said in my comments, like, I don't feel like we can have a budget that has salaries that are not covered. And I wanted to make my vote tonight be somehow contingent upon a plan to make sure this doesn't happen again. I realize a plan cannot be done, and by the time, there's important meetings that are gonna potentially affect our future beyond the schools, so I'm putting that aside on the good faith that our school committee will make sure that we have such a plan. So I'm just to say that point.
Any further discussion? All right, then we'll move to a roll call vote on the matter of.
Nobody seconded. Did
Oh.
you say
I thought we seconded. I thought Ken seconded.
Ken seconded.
it?
Yep. So on the matter of expending the entire Finance Committee Reserve Fund of $1.5 million to the schools to cover their fiscal year '24 deficit, we'll go roll call again. Chris Allen,
Yes.
Dustin Silk,
Yes.
Brianna Stetson,
Yes.
Keith Cheney,
Yes.
Eva Pastor,
Yes.
Ken Gray,
Yes.
Regina Keene,
Yes.
and the chair also votes yes. So that has passed, and the Finance Committee will transfer the entire $1.5 million to the school committee, to the schools.
Thank you.
Great. So next up is a discussion on the warrant articles and special education stabilization account with our town manager.
So originally, when we had voted on the article, we had voted it at the $220,000 number. Now we are asking you, as part of our plan to fund the deficit, to use this in its entirety in 1 year. So we're asking for the additional $530,000. It will leave about $40,000 in the account. As you know, in order to do this, we would need to suspend your rules, because your rules do say that the school committee can only withdraw a certain amount annually.
Yep.
And so we would be kind of asking you to suspend your rules to do that. One thing I think is important, and I do document it in my letter, but I just want to state it again now, is that doing this does require the schools to make an additional $230,000 cut as they go into fiscal year '25. And I think it's important to remember that the budget number is not going to change. So the budget we're bringing to town meeting, it looks like the budget we presented, it looks like the budget that's in the warrant, right? What's going to need to happen is a decrease in spending. And so we'll be working very closely on that, but it will require an additional $230,000. Only one cut, because they'll carry it into fiscal year '26 as well.
So how much are we taking out of the special education stabilization? Is it 750?
$750,000 total.
And the rules are suspended because they're not allowed to take that full amount?
No.
in a
Our
year?
rules don't
Our
allow them.
rules. Okay.
Yeah, it's the financial policies, which are both yours and the select board. So
Yep.
the select board did vote on Monday night also to suspend their rules and to support the transfer of the $750,000. I did want to mention, and I probably should have mentioned this before, what happens if we don't fund the deficit, right? So when you have a deficit, if you end your fiscal year in a deficit, there's a couple of things that can happen. One, they can hit your free cash, right? So the state basically will say, you're in the red, right? And you don't get to have free cash this year, which would be terrible. Another thing that they can do is they can actually require you to raise it in the following year. So what they'll say is, you're ending your fiscal year at $1 million. So instead of being able to raise Proposition 2.5, we're actually only going to let you raise 1%. Which means that we would be required to do even more cuts going into fiscal year '25, and none of us want to see that. I just think those are important points. Lynn, am I missing anything else okay? I think those are important points. We've never obviously had to deal with that happening, but we also don't want to. So yeah.
All right, thanks. Thank you. Any other questions for the town manager on this one? So we're actually going to have to suspend our rules to suspend our rules. Because this is a new item that we need to vote on, so we need to suspend our rules to be able to vote
to suspend our rules?
On this, to suspend our rules
All right,
to
all right,
allow
all right,
for
all right.
the.
I make a motion to suspend our rules so we're unable to make a vote on suspending the rules for the special education stabilization account.
All right. Thank you. Do we have a second by Regina? Is there any discussion on the suspension of the rules? If I said that correctly?
You did.
Anyone?
Can we have a discussion about the discussion?
Maybe next meeting, Ken, all right? Let's save that one. All right, so then we'll go to a roll call vote on suspending the rules to vote on suspending our policies. Maybe that's the more accurate way to
okay.
say it, or the more clear way to say it. Okay, Chris Allen.
Yes.
Dustin Silk.
Yes.
Brianna Stetson.
Yes.
Keith Cheney.
Yes.
Eva Pastor.
Yes.
Ken Gray.
Yes.
Regina Keene.
Yes.
And the chair also votes yes. So now I would accept a motion on the suspension of the policy as we have suspended our rules.
All right. I move that the Finance Committee suspend its rules to allow for the $750,000 to be removed from the special education stabilization account to go towards the FY25 school deficit.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Eva. Okay, so now we will, any discussion?
Can I just amend the motion, just fiscal year 24 deficit?
boy.
50 or 24?
You're moving us, we're going back in the future.
I
Yeah, so 25, that's okay.
Did I really, I'm reading 24 and I said 25?
I once sent my
Okay.
Christmas cards in the fiscal year by accident, so it happens. It's all good.
Thank you for that, okay.
I guess I know I'm not on your Christmas card
Yeah,
list because I
we'll
didn't
see
get
next
that
year.
one.
That's wrong.
All right. So where are we now? We're on discussion, we're on a vote. So
We're on
let's
the
do a
vote.
roll call vote on the suspension of our policies to allow for the special education stabilization account transfer. Chris Allen,
Yes.
Dustin Silk,
Yes.
Brianna Stetson,
Yes.
Keith Cheney,
Yes.
Eva Pastor,
Yes.
Ken Gray,
Yes.
Regina Keene,
Yes.
and the chair votes yes. So we approve that transfer, Madam Town Manager.
That was just the.
You're still suspended then.
Oh, we did.
Now we actually have to.
We just, okay, so we've,
We have to-
I thought we already
Right,
suspended.
yeah. I move that we allocate 250,000, the full special,
I accept it.
750.
750,000 from the special education reserve fund to the schools for FY24 budget.
Okay. Second.
Perfect. Second, moved by Regina, seconded by Chris. Any discussion? Good. Let's move to a vote. Chris Allen,
Yes.
Dustin Silk,
Yes.
Brianna Stetson,
Yes.
Keith Cheney,
Yes.
Eva Pastor,
Yes.
Ken Gray,
Yes.
Regina Keene,
Yes.
and the chair also votes yes. So now we have, and I thank you for bearing with me on my Robert's rules there. I think I got a little lax there, so I apologize. So we have officially approved that transfer. So I think that concludes our official business. I think the only thing we have left, team, as a finance committee, is to approve some minutes. They were included in your packet, so if anybody has any questions, comments, concerns on the minutes, or I would certainly entertain a motion.
I move to approve the open session meetings from April 8, 2024.
Okay, moved by Chris. Any second?
Second.
Second by Brianna. Okay, so we will go with any discussion on the minutes? Okay, we'll move to a roll call vote on approval of the minutes. Chris Allen.
Yes.
Dustin Silk.
Yes.
Brianna Stetson.
Yes.
Keith Cheney.
Yes.
Eva Pastor.
I wasn't there at that meeting.
So you're abstaining?
Yes.
Okay. Ken Gray.
I think I was there. If I wasn't, I
You
didn't
weren't
vote.
there.
You could vote even if you were
Was I
there.
there?
Yeah, I was the only one out there.
You can
Okay,
still,
okay.
You can still vote.
You can still
Okay.
vote. even
Oh,
if
I
you
can,
weren't
that's
there.
right, you reminded me.
Regina Keene.
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. So the minutes are approved, and we just have one more motion to make tonight, I think.
Motion to adjourn.
Yes, that was the one. Moved by Chris at 9:02 PM. Do we have a second? Second by Eva. We'll do a roll call vote. Chris Allen.
Yes.
Dustin Silk.
Yes.
Brianna Stetson.
Yes.
Keith Cheney.
Yes.
Eva Pastor.
Yes.
Ken Gray.
Yes.
Regina Keene.
Yes.
The chair votes yes. We are officially adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.